Welcome to Outer Space, International Arts and Class Struggle Podcast.
On this week's show, Unionising Artists, Roses for All and Bread Too, an interview with Teresa Easton. In the space station, commentary with Paul Paranoid. With Jonas this week, we have music from Bethany Elen, with a track called Ella's Song. Okay, so my name is Rob McDonald and I'm the host of Outer Space International Arts and Class Struggle podcast. And today we have a guest called Teresa Easton. Hi, Teresa, are you there?
Hi, Rob. Nice to see and hear you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. So as I understand, Teresa, you're a printmaker. And you're also a political activist, and you're one of the founding members of the Arts Union in England. So those are the things I want to talk to you about today. So that's basically who I think you are. Who would you say you were? How, without going into too much detail, tell us a little bit about your artistic exploits, first of all.
Well, I'm definitely a printmaker. I studied fine art and printmaking donkeys years ago, about 20 odd years ago, 1998. I qualified. And I've always used printmaking in whatever kind of art form I'm using. So like a few years ago, I was lucky enough to go off to Sunderland University and do an MA in glass, which I loved, but I used printmaking in it. So I always kind of go back to it. It's where I feel safe.
So it's like your printmaking is like, it's your ground zero, if you like. It's where you revert back. It's a bit like me. I do lots of things and I always revert back to stone. It's like, because it's what you know how to manipulate the best. I mean, what kind of printing do you do in general? What would you do books?
I guess at the minute, I do a few books. I do kind of artist books or zines or chapbooks they're called sometimes, these kind of little ephemera kind of books, but I've made them using kind of a fine art printing process, which takes forever. So they become less ephemera. But I love doing zines, which are more kind of photocopied or screen printed sometimes. But more recently, I've been really developing and honing my letterpress skills.
Okay. Because just maybe there's a link there with us. There's two links, actually. One is that I understand that people used to use limestone in printing. And there's a whole process there, which I'm always shocked about. How do you do that? And I'm interested because I'm always thinking about how to manipulate stone in a different way. And I have discussed with some art friends about, well, can we put images on it? How, because obviously I carve into it and that kind of stuff. And actually, when I was my last year at school, I did a work experience in a print shop just before actually printing got completely changed, as it happens. So it was a waste of time. But I made a little book. So that's my only real connections with printmaking. But that's your main working focus, is it? Printing and creating?
It's my studio practice, really. That's what I do when I have time to get in the studio and do stuff. And then the rest of the time I'm making me living as like a community artist.
Right. Okay.
Doing a lot of socially engaged work, community projects, often commissions, publicly funded, sometimes with young people, but generally not with little toddlers, but generally with sort of teenagers or older people or groups.
Okay, could you explain a little bit more about that? I mean, I noticed in your bio on your website, you talked about it always rings lovely bells for me when I read the word participation, community, activist, and so we're obviously of the same kind of person. But could you explain just for the listeners a little bit of the background of those kind of community activist projects that you do?
Well, I guess there's a lot of talk and discourse around people accessing culture and art. The Arts Council's done a lot of kind of research into it, and they've seen the disparity of, working class communities not accessing art. So they've sort of come up with a strategy, Let's Create, which is about looking at how to increase and widen participation. But I guess the kind of work I do, which is sometimes funded through Arts Council, through other organisations, the kind of work I do is also about looking at sort of social commentary, like what's happening in the world. So like, I guess one of the sort of more recent projects, if we don't include the past sort of 7 months of COVID, was working with some young people down in Durham and just meeting up with them every now and then and doing zines with them. And that was inspired through them coming along to a workshop I did a couple of years ago now down at Red Hills in Durham, which is Durham Miners Association. It's their big building. And I did a workshop there with them, looking at the history of Durham Miners Association and this beautiful building that was built by the miners. We did printmaking and drawing and photography. And out of that, they just said, oh, well, maybe we could like meet up and do stuff. You know, some of the kids were interested in the climate strikes that were going on at the time. Some of them were looking at LGBTQ stories and experiences, and they wanted to put them into zines. So I managed to get a little bit of funding, and that paid for my time, because I can't always do these things for free. I need to have my time covered.
Well, this is one of the things we'll come to discuss later.
Yeah, you cannot live on fresh air.
I just noticed also that you talked about, and this also interested me, you talked about heritage, and you just mentioned the miners' strike there. I mean, when I was 15, it was the height of the miners' strike, and I remember my mum telling me we couldn't have a video player because we've got to support the miners in Doncaster, and we're from the Midlands, the South Midlands, and we were in London at that time. I was like, what the fuck, And anyway, I got a real education of that heritage of our class struggle background. It made me the person I was, really. I was a young, skinny boy from London who didn't really have a clue about these things, and then the next thing I knew, I was on a picket line with a load of burly miners and lots of effing and swearing, but I learned loads of culture at that particular moment, and I don't think people do. And you talk about the heritage of things. For me, I'm involved in heritage projects, monuments, and this kind of stuff. So that's interesting that you map out the heritage part with the community part.
Well, it's important because that's what people's culture is, isn't it? It's what's around them.
Yeah, exactly. It's daily life, but actually behind daily life, there's a whole history. And so you talk about the big Durham Miners building. Well, where did that appear from? That didn't come from nowhere. That building was on the basis of 100 years of struggle and history, which obviously creates a space and a place to do things, which I think when we talk about access in the arts, that's really important. And I think that brings me on to the next question. And one of the reasons to get in contact with you is that of the Artist Union that you were a founding member of. And I think it's important for this show particularly to talk to you, because we've been talking about a whole number of questions in the last 20 odd shows. And we always talk about artist as a worker, and a worker as an artist, and the need to organize. Every show we do has an element about getting organized. And there you are, setting up an artist union. So for the interest, could you give us a little bit of background about what is the Artist Union, maybe what it isn't, if that's relevant, and how it came about and what your role is in that?
Well, it's a trade union, so it's not like an arts organisation. It's not a professional body that can give you insurance and job opportunities. It's not that at all. And we were very much inspired by Scottish Artists Union. They've been going for a good, about 15 years now. And they inspired us to set one up in England, which is why it's called Artists Union England, because the Scottish one had been going for quite a while. And it came about through a group of 3 women who just had a chat and were fed up one day and said, we need a trade union. And those women went out and spoke to other women like myself. And it's mainly women that set it up, and we have a majority women membership. And I don't think that's a coincidence at all. And so we sat down and said, right, how do we go around setting up a trade union? Because we felt that because we were working as freelance, self-employed individual artists, that was being exploited. Our wages were just being driven as low as possible because we were constantly competing with each other on how cheaply we could do a job or a commission rather than the quality of the work. So we looked and spoke to other trade unions like Equity, like Musicians Union. We looked around to see, was there anything else that we could like just join and assimilate into? But there was no trade union that understood our work sector, our how we worked, what kind of exploitation we experienced. So we set one up, basically. We got some people interested together. We wrote a rule book. We raised money and applied for a certification of independence, which you have to do in order to be a trade union. It was a rule that was brought in by Margaret Thatcher to make it quite difficult for workers to organise, because you have to pay £4,000. So we got together and said, right, what's what AIM's going to be? And what are the first things that we need to do when we get set up? And one of those was rates of pay, just setting out basic guidelines. So we're all singing from the same song sheet, and it gives members leverage, when they query a job and go, oh, that's not what I can kind of work for. I can't work for that, really. And this is what my trade union recommends. Even if you're negotiating at something, and getting organised, means knowing what your rights are. You talked about workers. As self-employed people, we have the least amount of rights, legally.
Yes.
We're covered by the Health and Safety Act and the Equality Act. In terms of employment legislation, nothing protects us. But that's why we need to be understanding what legislation can cover you, because sometimes jobs are given to you when that should be a pay-as-you-earn job. That shouldn't be a freelance job. People should be getting pensions. They should be getting maternity rights. They should be getting sick pay. So it's getting organised means a lot of different things.
Yeah, I mean, this subject obviously is fascinating, and there's a million directions and a load of things I think we need to talk about, and we'll try and touch on some of them. I think first of all, the fact that you started as a group of women, I think is very, as you said, it's not accidental, and I think that in some ways you're dealing with a sector as well that is unrepresentative. In terms of the artists union. And so, maybe if you could just explain about who you are attempting to organise, because there is the musicians union, there is Equity, and we could have some discussions about their strengths and weaknesses and whatever. But there are unions that represent artists in general in different, and sometimes they're craft union-y and not class struggle based unions. And we had a discussion with a playwright actually in Chicago on the show, and he talked about there were craft unions in the city, but they weren't organizing, and so I'm kind of interested if you could expand a little bit on what is it you want the artist union to be, and who are you actually trying to organize?
I guess the artists we're organising are like visual artists, they're applied artists, they're those who work in the community, work with sound, with performance. They tend to be self-employed, even if they've got like a little part-time job in a pub or they do cleaning. Their main aspiration is to do that job as an artist full-time and be paid for that. So they're the sort of workers that we're trying to organise. Sorry, what was your other question again?
Oh, I think, I just mentioned the fact that it was really interesting that it was women that first started up the process. So maybe I didn't put a question in there, but maybe you could develop that point. Why you said, why do you think that's important? Why do you think it was that way? Why was it not an accident? I'm just kind of interested in that comment that you made.
It goes back to just gender pay gap. The gender pay gap runs throughout all work. It doesn't have to be somebody who works at the BBC or works in ASDA. That gender pay gap runs throughout industries, including our sector. And you just sort of look around, and see who's got the sort of top profile jobs. You look at even successful visual artists who are women. The recognition they get is often like well past the 60s, 70s, 80s, and sometimes, by the time they're dead. So there's the sense that, women are coming off worse because they're carers, because they're parents, they're the ones who don't get the maternity leave. You know, they're the ones who, when they do take that leave, it's their profession, really, it's their kind of career that suffers, because they're sort of missing out on a lot of things. So that obviously has intersectionality as well, you know, whereby if you're a disabled artist and you're a woman, you know, it's going to be much, much harder for you to penetrate the sector. If you're a black artist, even if you do penetrate it, how does that sector keep you in there? It's, you know, it's often, artists are often felt, if they're coming from minority groups, that they're just there as a token gesture, really. They're just ticking somebody's box for the public funding. So, you know, the recent Black Lives Matter campaign. Sorry, go on.
No. So you continue. Black Lives Matter sounds interesting where you're going.
Yeah, the recent Black Lives Matter campaign has been fantastic, I think, for our sector, because it's thrown up loads of issues and in some instances really genuinely made some organisations look at themselves quite critically. And then it's made some sort of organisations just sort of put out sort of token statements which actually don't mean a lot. But it's galvanised, what I can say anyway, in the northeast of England, where I'm from, it's galvanised artists to get together and start to organise, which is brilliant. And it's galvanised.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's really interesting because we interviewed an artist from Harlem in New York, and his contribution, we were discussing statues and the Black Lives Matter stuff, and his contribution was of a very broad perspective of things were changing and the need to get organized, and you know, and the Black Lives Matter thing wasn't in isolation of other struggles, and particularly of an historical sense in the US, but actually it was a representation of general anger, you know, but it had galvanized in this way. And I think it's interesting as well, because you talk about the gender pay gap and these kind of things, which are really historical problems that are still we have to fight for at every step of the way. And for me, there's a link with the artist in general, because they don't pay us at all most of the time. And there's this idea that an artist isn't a worker, and that actually, I mean, I've come to terms with it, that if they don't pay me, I'm going to do it anyway kind of philosophy. And actually that's quite bad, you know, because you wouldn't go in and stack a shelves because you loved it, you know. I mean, you might. Some people love some OCD people really love stuff, that kind of thing. That's not really what I mean. But what I'm getting at is that we do it because it's our hunt to be a human being, is to be an artist, you know, and therefore they get away with not paying with us in the same way as quite often with women and mothers, they do the second job at home because it's it's what they have to do, you know, to bring up the family, and then they go into the workplace and get paid less, you know, or don't get paid at all for labor that they do day in, day out. And why not? Why doesn't society reward, you know, different types of labor? And this for me comes into this question of what the artist is. And I've been thinking quite a lot about it, and I don't know what you think about this, but normally, I mean, if we can go back to some Marxist sort of terms, the artist's relationship with the means of production is one of an artisan, if one of the, if you like, of a middle class sort of self-isolated craftsperson. And that historically is where they came from. This is where, you know, printmakers and stonemasons, we you know, our roots are in artisanism. But that's over in many ways. You know, the artisan is gone, you know, and actually most artists are thrown into the working classes, if not by their chosen profession, but by their reality. But that is not reflected in the workers' movement, which is why I think you are very important and what you're attempting to do, because you're attempting to trade unionize us. You know, I guess I'm a visual artist as a sculptor, and I don't know where to join. I've joined different things, and there's different sectors of big trade unions. It doesn't make no sense to me. It's not the right, you know, I don't feel at home, you know, in that. So I think it's very important what you do. So one of the next question I wanted sort of to develop onto is that I know that you've been very central in developing the Good Practice for Artists Charter. I don't know if I got the words right in that. Will you correct me? and I've looked at it, and could you explain what that process is, what that means to create this charter, and how you intend to use it?
Yeah, the charter is really important. It's one of the aims that we said we wanted to do at the very beginning of setting up the trade union back in 2014, and it was about regulating the sector. A lot of trade unions, including Musicians' Union and Equity to a certain degree, have these collective bargaining agreements. So where they have trade union recognition with their employer, they'll sit down and agree what are the terms and conditions of their workers in that workplace, how much are they going to get paid, how they're going to be treated at work, what they do if it's disciplinary. As visual artists, we don't have any of that. We have no kind of protection or sort of guidelines almost. And I know over the years, talking to members at different meetings around the country, they've often come back to this thing of, wouldn't it be good if there's like organisations that had almost like a kite mark, so we knew that would be a good organisation to work for? Because they often talk to me about horrendous experiences that they'd had. And I'd sit there and think, this is like deja vu. I'm hearing this over and over again. These are really simple issues and problems that organisations can do something about. But what they're doing is disincentivising artists from going back to work with them. And some are just leaving the sector altogether. And these tend to be your working class artists because they can't there's no financial cushion for them. They either get paid or they don't. So the Good Practice Charter is a set of 6 principles that we want generally publicly funded organisations to sign up to begin with and work towards. But these principles address basic things at work, so that the things like valuing artists, so using contracts, paying them on time. If you can organise a fixed term contract, do that, because it's been proven, we've got evidence that, artists who come from poorer backgrounds, working class backgrounds, don't tend to go for jobs or commissions where they've just got this overall figure, and out of that you have to use your materials, and you have to do all these other things, because they just think, well, how much am I going to get paid? They're less likely to go for these commissions which aren't paid very well. So you're not going to get the diversity there. Then there's health and safety. COVID has really shown workers, in particular, all workers, how important trade unions are, because they're the ones who are health and safety trained. They're the ones who've got that leverage in the workplace. And we need protecting in the workplace as well. And then there's diversity and equality. And again, there's absolutely loads of research out there which shows good employers what they can do to increase the diversity and to work towards equality and equity within their space. And then it's got other ones about social responsibility, and it's got, oh goodness, I've had a bit of a mind block on them. I'm busy trying to fight with
mental well-being, because you've had a mental mind block.
Yeah, massively. Mental health and well-being is huge. Again, because something like when we've done surveys, loads of our members have come back with issues around mental health and well-being. And that's something everyone should be doing. When you go to a workplace, it'd be good to know, like, who's the first aider, who's the mental health first aider, what's their mental health policy.
I mean, just as a side, before I sort of delve a little bit deeper into the charter idea, I think this is really important because we've done one show so far on mental health and arts, and there is a definite connection. And it's not, and in that show we explored a little bit about, well, is it that we're all on the edge anyway as characters, and that's what makes us artists, or is it because we're artists that we're thrust into this situation of precarity all the time, and therefore we're mentally stressed about, we don't know where the next meal's coming from, kind of thing, or is it because we can't do the profession we want to do? We don't all get a calling in life, but if you get a calling to be a creative, artistic person and you want to do that, and there's no avenue for you to do it, that is also denying your basic wish. Now, you can't get everything you want in life, but actually this mental health care question is not generally taken up properly by the workers' movement in many ways. It's often seen as, they just couldn't handle it. Actually, at the moment, nobody can handle nothing if they're dead honest. So I think it's really good that you had that in your charter. I think it is the 6th point. So when I look at the charter, it's nicely, we'll put it in the details underneath so people can go to it and they can have a look for themselves and, they can see what they think. And I quite like the way that you presented it. I went to the opening that you did a few weeks ago, months ago now, maybe. And it was a very open event, and it's a working program. It's a working strategy. I guess this is you putting something out. Let's get started. Kind of, that's how I read it. And I liked that. And, people like me who aren't in the Artists Union, aren't even in the country, I was in there giving my opinion, which is great. And so it seems like it's a basis for us to start organising as artists in one concrete way. There's a couple of things that hit me. Probably the biggest thing is how will we enforce it? Because the power of a trade union is in collectivization and is fundamentally in withdrawing our labour. And I've seen in different times artist strikes, and it never kind of works out. And and one of the problems of artists is we often work in collectives and these kind of places, but we often work individually, and so there's this disparity. So one of the things I'm sort of wondering, how are you going to, send it to public places, public institutions, and, if they sign it, then you give them a tick, and they get a smiley face, but I think that's good. We have to do that. But I'm also of the face that, we give them a smiley face and we show them our fist, at the same time. And this is a working class method. And so I'm kind of interested in, how would you organize the pressure on the institutions, on management, on private sector as well, because it would have to be that as well, particularly in the world of such privatization. So could you give us a little flavor of how you envisage or how you've done that or how you would want to do that if you got bigger, these kind of questions?
I guess, the union is only as strong as its members and its activists, really. And in the past, when the unions had casework, so when there's been issues between our members and a commissioner or an employer, it's often done behind kind of closed doors, that the union deals with it, they write letters, they have a meeting, they come to some kind of agreement. But the Good Practice Charter, it's quite different. And it's in a similar way almost to the rates of pay guidance we have. This is very much about the members. The members have to sign up to the Good Practice Charter. It's not just about organisation. When you join the union, you're always also signing up to this Good Practice Charter. So it's up to the members in a way to kind of police organisations. So if they do have an issue and they think, well, aren't they signed up to the Good Practice Charter? Or the member here is from another artist who's not a member, of issues coming up with a particular organisation that shouldn't, because they've signed up to this charter and they should be actually working towards this framework, then that's where the union has to step in, and that's where the union has to kind of mobilise the members, and you have an open discussion, you have an open campaign about it, because that's what we haven't been able to do when members have had personal individualized issues that become this casework. It's very rare that we're able to share the good news and say, oh, look, this member got paid because of this bad employer, and we held them to account, and this is what they've done, this is what we've agreed. With the Good Practice Charter, it's about educating our members. So it's something that we take to members' meetings. So we've got a Lancashire meeting coming up on Wednesday, and we'll be talking about it there and helping members understand what their rights are when they're at work. So
yeah, so it's as much training and educational for ourselves. What we actually should be entitled to, and maybe a platform to say, right, if you cross that line, we're going to campaign against you, and therefore it's a bit like putting a flag in the sand for artists. It hasn't existed beforehand. Is that the kind of thing you're saying?
Absolutely.
And if you've got a lot of activists, if you've got a lot of people involved, and if we're more collectively organised, then we're going to have more power.
Yeah.
Cool.
And this is we've used social media before in the past with organisations. That was when we first started out, and we used to hit social media first to sort of get a response, and that often worked. I was part of the other great exhibition of the North in the Northeast, and it was a collective response to the Great Exhibition of the North that was imposed on us,
yes,
kind of like by government. And so we organised a community response to that, and we did it by word of mouth and social media, and it was successful in the sense that we had a very strong grassroots response, and that's what our union's like, because it's very small still, and it is very much members led and grassroots.
Well, I mean, all of that rings super important to me, and it's one of the things that this show is about, flagging up. So anything you do, we're gonna post it, we're gonna push it, because this idea of collectively coming together is the key question, because actually artists have a significant role to play in society as well, and the fact that you're pulling together these strands, I think, is very important. The other thing that I noticed in the charter in a couple of places, and it's the next question I really want to go on to, because you talk about, paying artists, that we should have rates of pay, and you've done work on that as well, which I think is important. And I've looked at it, I thought, I've never been paid that. And if I have, then the 1 hour I got paid for that, I actually did 20 hours worth of work for it, and mostly the work I do, because I add participation and community activism into it, I do that for free generally. And then I noticed also the final point under the mental health wellbeing one was no unpaid overtime, and I thought, wow, that would be good. So this isn't a revolutionary program, but it is actually a revolutionary program, because these things don't exist, and they would struggle to exist in this society. And this is where my next question comes from, because when I read all this and I looked at the Artists Union, I think brilliant, great, and then I thought, right, should I join? I looked, and I probably fit your criteria, which is good, and you've got to have a criteria. But my concern is that out there is a million artists, not just hobbyists, but people who are trying to be, who live under the pay-to-play thing, who do exhibitions, who play gigs and don't get paid for it. They may get a pint and a fiver if they're lucky, and that's if there's any way to to actually play in the first place. I mean, you would say, all right, that's musicians union territory, but I don't think they've ever done anything about that. And the same for visual artists, so we live in this world where most artists aren't workers, because we have second and third jobs, including, I don't know about you, but I certainly do. I do these great big high profile monuments, and actually I'm teaching on the side, because that's what pays the bills. So I'm kind of thinking, what's your take on that side of it? How are we going to get particularly young artists organized? How are we going to reach them? Because, and it's no criticism of what you're doing, but if I was a young artist like I was when I was 20 and I went to your site, there was no way I could fit your criteria, maybe 1.5, how do you think we have to bridge that gap? How do you think we're going to politicize? Artists are already political, I think. I don't think we need to go politicizing necessarily, but how do we make it accessible so that they know that they can come into this family of people who want to organize, and they can be part of the fight? How do you see that with the Artists Union or in some other way?
I think it's a question that loads of trade unions are asking themselves, because if young people don't join a trade union by the age of something like 25, they never join a trade union. That's some stats that's come out. So because a lot of our members also teach, they also teach in universities, they're in a very good position to speak to these young people. I do it, and the opportunity I get if I do any teaching in university. And if I'm asked to go in and give a presentation, I always say, look, I'll be talking about the union, because I'll be talking about commissions I've done, which were good commissions in that I got paid well and I enjoy it. And then I'll also talk about the commissions that weren't very good and I didn't get paid very well. Because you never hear that from artists when they're giving talks, and they never promote their work and go, I've just done this fantastic commission, but by the way, they were really shite at paying us on time, I worked so many hours, my mental health really suffered from it. Nobody promotes that, do they?
No.
So one of the things that I do, and I know other members do, is they're very honest. They have really honest conversations and they share. I think younger artists maybe aren't political, they're not politicized. This mantra of becoming a very individualized entrepreneur, sole trader, that's the kind of model out there of becoming an artist. educating artists. And there's loads of different models of being an artist out there, you know. Working collectively is one of the best ways, because you've got strength in numbers and you share things. You know, the more you share, you get sort of 10 times back on what you're sharing. So there's lots of different ways that we need to sort of reach younger artists. And if you go on our website, I agree. I think it can look quite kind of alien to a younger artist, because there's so many obstacles they have to overcome. And if you're a young artist from a minority group or a working class background, you're probably already suffering from imposter syndrome, thinking, well, do I belong there? You know, and even looking at our union.
That would be imposter syndrome for artists. That
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, looking at our union, you might think that. You might think, well, do I belong there? Am I a real artist? I've got all these other jobs.
Yeah.
So there's more work the union needs to do. There's more work we need to do in reaching younger artists. But I know the one or two younger artists, like the sixth formers I worked with at Durham Sixth Form, they're now off at university. They all know about trade unions. You know, I didn't just introduce them to Artists Union England. Some of them worked in bars and pubs. I introduced them to the Bakers Union, the Met Bakers Union reps. They taught them zine making in a really informal session. And the Bakers Union reps talked to them about, you know, being in a union and how they became reps. So it's not, I don't think it's just artists, young artists understanding trade unions. From Artists Union England point of view, they have to understand all trade unions. So whatever job you're doing, you should be in a trade union if you can afford it.
Well, I think there's some great stuff there. I mean, for me, it's this question of how do you bring the workers' movement to the artist and vice versa, which actually I think is sometimes more important, because I don't know, you've probably been in them. I've been in a million dusty, boring meetings that mean zero to me, where the pieces of paper are passed, and, you know, particularly young people, but some of us older ones as well, want action. You know, and I would say one of the most important things to stimulate young people is to make it relevant, you know, that you're fighting. You know, probably in the commentary afterwards, me and Paul will talk about it, because we met in a fight as young musicians, and the Musicians Union or others seemed utterly irrelevant. So we organised ourselves and we put pressure on certain breweries and certain places, and we won money. You know, we won places to play, we built the scene, we created the art, and we also earned for the first time and allowed younger artists to come through. So I think, that's the trade unions in general, the workers' movement in general has to shape up, you know, particularly at the moment with the COVID crisis, because I think you can easily analyze capitalist economy in the last periods, and you would say, well, this crisis was coming anyway. But it's come at a particular level for artists because of the closing down of places. And so not only were we first of all overexploited, we're now doubly, you know, and actually careers have collapsed, and people, well, if there is another job, they'd go to it, but all those other jobs are being closed down at the moment. So I think there's a vacuum there, isn't there? You know, which kind of brings me on to the sort of final point I want to raise with you, which is, what do you think in a wider sense? Obviously, we're talking about trade unions, organising, campaigning, protesting, all this kind of stuff, dead important. But what do you think the role of the artist is in general in changing society, in actually pushing, you know, out this sort of commodified capitalist agenda of arts, and to bringing in a more socialistic outlook, and even going further than that, how to get rid of capitalism, how to have a socialist society? What do you see the role of artists is in that? Do you have a flavour or something, the way you'd like to put that?
I guess one of the things I like doing is reminding people of what passed, really, and the things that we can learn from that. You know, I often take sort of stories that people didn't know much about or forgotten, or and try and sort of bring them to light and give them a sort of relevance to what's happening to today, and just draw those parallels. But I guess, you know, living in Britain under this particular government, you know, they're doing their damn bestest to make it as hard as possible for young people at schools and even at universities now of having any kind of critical thinking, any kind of, you know, looking at things from a different point of view and being able to express yourself. So I I do see my role as an artist as trying to sort of engage as many people as possible with art, and just to allow them to experience it really and do something they wouldn't normally be able to do because they're too busy working or they're too busy bringing up kids or having other responsibilities.
I think you've hit something really important there, that this critical thinking. I mean, one of the first we did a Prelude podcast, which was just me ranting. And then we did our first interview with Jackie Berry, she was a COVID nurse, and she was writing poetry, and we talked about that. And then we sort of talked about in the next couple of interviews, it was right in the middle of the first wave of the COVID stuff. And I spoke to some trade unionists, and actually there's lots of horrors to this crisis. But one of the things it did do is create this crazy space that people suddenly had time to do things, or they were at home or they were unemployed. And people, and one experience I had is I live in a very busy, built up working class area in Barcelona. And for the first time I heard the birds singing. And I was feeling a bit weirded out by the whole nobody in the street, and but actually I heard the birds singing, and then I was sitting and I looked on the wall and I saw my guitar there I hadn't touched for 20 years, and it created this space. And the word you said there was critical thinking, and my question was obviously, what's the role of the artist? And I think one of our roles in this moment is to say, hey, look, do you remember that little bit of space you had? Well, they'll get rid of that as soon as they can. Expand it quickly, start thinking, start putting forward crazy ideas. I mean, I'm a great believer in every crazy idea counts. Not that you have to do every crazy idea, but every crazy idea counts. Everything somebody can add to the table might stimulate the next person. And I think as artists, because we're in that hunt to be human beings, and we do these things for free sometimes, whatever, because we can't help ourselves almost. I mean, I don't know that I speak for every artist in that sense, but certainly from my outlook is I don't do this because I want to get paid. I believe I should be paid. I don't do it because I want to be paid. So that critical thinking, and you tied it a little bit to learning lessons of the past. I mean, I found that interesting because certainly you talked about heritage before. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's me ranting on. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just thought you hit an important nail on the head there. That one of the roles of artists is critical thinking. Would you add anything else to that?
Yeah. I mean, it just goes back to the attacks that we've had on the sort of school curriculum and having music, removed, drama removed, all this emphasis on literacy and numeracy. There's a reason why that. The government does this. They don't want people thinking for themselves. They don't want people looking at things from a different point of view, which is what critical thinking is. It allows you to sort of look at things from a different point of view, which is what lots of different types of artists can do. Yet, during the COVID crisis, the NHS leaflets that were coming through my door on how I should look after my mental health all looked at, listen to music, that'll take your mind off things. Do something creative, read a book, all these things which rely on people being creative. But if you're not allowing for a more sort of diverse group of people to learn and train in these areas, then how do you expect people to suddenly be able to pick up a pencil and do a drawing or, do some writing that they've never done before? I mean, I found during COVID that even I myself was experiencing time in the studio that I've just never had for donkey's years, because I'm always running around like a blue horse fly trying to get jobs and work.
Yeah.
And suddenly I thought, Jesus,
all my projects stopped, and I was like, at first I was like, thank fuck. And then I was like, and then later on, when all the money stopped with it, I was like, oh shit. But actually there was this moment where actually it was space to breathe, and I like to think that people, not because not all workers had that at all, and many were working through it. Many were in danger, and all the other questions, and then also people lost their livelihood. So there was a very quickly another stress. But there was a glimpse there, wasn't there? There was a little opening, maybe shorter or longer for different people, where we were actually for the first time we're thinking, hang on a minute, is this how the world should be? Should we not have this time to rethink our careers and our lives? For me, it's ended up with a podcast. I'm not in a dusty studio because actually I couldn't get to my studio because my studio was out of town. I wasn't allowed to leave the neighborhood. So I was like, okay, here I am. I got a computer. I've got a microphone from the old band days. Let's put them together and let's see what we can do. So I think, that creativity, we don't stop as creatives. The question is, where do we take it? And how do we politicize it? Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say, or are you happy to wind it up there?
No, that sounds good, because we've done my COVID talk. I think most of the conversations I have with anybody, you have to have 10 minutes to talk about COVID. Where are we at? What are we doing? What can we complain about?
Definitely.
But no, it's good. It's good.
Well, listen, Teresa, thank you very much for the organising you're doing, and for the Artists Union. We'll share your stuff, definitely. We hope that you grow rapidly, and wish you luck with all your campaigns. But also, let's keep in contact, because I think one of the interesting things is you've only been going not many years. You're new. And the word has to get out there, and you have to build, and you have to prove yourself, I guess, as well as an effective trade union. I think the work you've done so far in writing the rates of pay and the charter, like I said before, the great ground stuff. Now let's give them a fight, because I think, in my opinion, COVID has only highlighted the crisis that was already there, and they ain't going to get better next year, even if we're all injected and made, whatever. None of the problems are going away. We've just had a glimpse. We've had 1 year where we can do something. So from our podcast, thank you. And hopefully you'll be up for keeping us up to date with what you're up to.
Absolutely. That'd be lovely. Thank you.
Okay, Teresa, take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Okay, then let's make our way up to the space station and see if Paul is in. Are you there, Paul? Can you hear us?
Oh, hi, Rob. How you doing? I'm up here. You okay?
Man. Good. Yes, very good. Good to hear your voice. So, what did you think of that then? That interview with Teresa on the Artists Union?
I think it's really great to end the series on this one, because that was a real battle cry for everything we think about things.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's, like you say, it's a good one to finish the series on, series 2, because it kind of encapsulates many of the things that we've been talking about, doesn't it? I mean, I mentioned it in the discussion with her, but So you got any feelings from it? You got any things you want to raise?
I was very excited about what she was saying. This is everything that we sort of believe in, the organisation of artists to some sort of formalised kind of system of being understood in a capitalist structure. I love all that, and she touched on some really hot topics. I mean, the one I'm going to launch into that, because I can't really do justice to everything she said. It's in the interview anyway, but basically, one thing that really flew at me was when she started talking about the lack of resources, especially of working class artists. That really affected me, because I suddenly thought to myself, yes, because for most of the last century, and certainly before the last century, art was the preserve of the upper middle class and the upper class. And I used the example, thinking about it and making notes about it, about the it's all across the professions, but the one that is a really good example is the acting profession. After the war, last century, actors were almost exclusively, with very few exceptions like Richard Burton, almost exclusively middle class and upper middle class people who had the resources behind them for them to be able to sort of dally, with the arts, as it were. And I was really affected by that, because it brought it into close perspective for me, because suddenly I thought, if society does acknowledge that art is an important component in the culture, and then it's going to basically demarcate which classes are allowed to partake and which aren't, that's active prejudice
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's indicative actually that there's actually a union for artists being formed in this way. I mean, yes, the musicians union and equity and all these things have existed within workplaces, but I think what was very interesting for me was there's a huge space here. There's a huge unorganized section of people, and actually the class relationship of art has shifted to a certain degree, and artists who would have in the past, like you're saying, been middle class, and art is orientated towards the middle class, and they have the time, generally speaking, to take a risky career move towards the arts. It's almost like the Billy Elliot kind of situation, isn't it? Like when the dad says, well, you can't fucking be a ballet dancer, you silly prat, you've got to work down the mines as the mines are closing down. And so there's been a shift in some ways, and the arts industry is huge. It makes a lot of money. And so there is a lot of unorganized artists out there. And I think the fact that I think they've been going like 5 or 6 years. I think in 2014, I think she said, it's not very long. And it questions this, doesn't it? It questions, well, who does art belong to, and at what level in society should people be doing it, and this idea for doing things for free, it came up quite a few times.
Yeah, I mean, the next thing that that lit up for me particularly was there was the conversation you two had about withdrawing of labour, and that really made me think hard. And I thought, basically, and without us getting too deep into our own experiences with this, we're going to do that another time, I think, on another show. But basically, the withdrawing your labour question, and the thing that really struck me, that bothered me, and I understand the argument, I understand the capitalist argument, I get it, but basically, the idea that the problem is, you see, when the artist is put in a situation where they threaten to withdraw their labour, we have a situation where let's say employer, although the employer could be a lot of things. It could be a sort of an audience that's just there if you want it. It could be that you're working with a very specific employer. We did a lot of work in music. It's quite if a band goes to the venue and say you're not paying us enough, the venue can be like, well, if they're not ostensibly a music venue, but they're just a licensed premises, they can just be like, well, we don't need you that much. You know what I mean? And so the artist, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it does bring up a really big question for the podcast. And we've been banging on, and artists got to get organised, and we've been looking at different places around the world where there's been campaigns and protests and artists coming together and forming sort of collectives or union type structures. We've discussed it in many different shows over the 2 series so far. And then it comes to this interview, and they're doing it. They're pulling it together amongst a certain layer, and it's very, very good, and it's definitely to be supported. And the question will be how, and I think I raised it in the interview, how do you enforce these good ideas you're coming up with? How do you defend artists who, and when, like you said, and maybe we'll touch on a little bit in a minute about, being musicians and young musicians and doing something about it. But if you're an artist, how do you get into the gallery, and how do you get paid, and how do these things, and Teresa talked about this. She talked about contracts, and getting paid for the value and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's really key. The question is this, though, for me, is that artists are often left isolated and individualized because of the nature of the work we do, and overcoming that is actually quite a big question. And this is what I find exciting about this. And when we discussed with the PCS cultural group, and they were doing this, if you remember, this cross international union campaign for the arts, all these kind of things are bringing it in together collectively and saying, look, we have to struggle collectively. Now, it's difficult because artists in general, don't have one workplace. They can. And that's why theatres and musicians and those can be more easily collectively organised. But most artists, and particularly the visual ones that they're organising, are sort of left as freelancers, isolated, but we're freelancers, so we're kind of meant to be, I've got our own little business, but actually we're not small businesses, we're not middle class in that reality. Reality is we're working class, but we often have 2 or 3 jobs. So I think this withdrawing of your labour, how to organise, I think it's a big question, and I think the journey that they're on, we should have a very close and critical eye to it and watch it and say, and support it obviously, but say, okay, well, how are you going to strike? When it comes to the shit, when you've got a place that's not paying, what are you going to do? How are you going to shut down the shit workplace?
How do you strike when you care more about this going forward than the, in inverted commas, employer?
Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting. Yes, and it's a big one for us. I mean, and I don't think we can pretend it's an easy get out. It's like form a union and then we'll be fine because we'll all withdraw our labour. And I think that was one of the interesting things that she was talking about. This, and I got it in front of me here. It's the Good Practice Charter, and all very well and good, yeah. And she was saying, well, businesses and venues and public places should sign up for this. I think that's a great first start. The next start is, how do we make sure that they do that? And if everybody was collectively organised, in a certain area to start with, and they couldn't get the good artists, and then the artists went themselves away and organised their own exhibition where they would be paid, or where the revenue would be collectively or cooperatively brought back in, it would challenge the situation somewhat. But it is a problem, and I don't think you can easily solve it.
I tell you what. I'm going to throw. I know that we didn't discuss.
Throw a bomb in, are you?
I'm going to throw something in that's literally just occurred to me. So I apologise for us not bringing this up in the preparation. But you know what? We've been raised to think that there's no value. No value. There's a kind of an assumption that the capitalist society doesn't regard the arts as important, and we get asked to take that lie on and have a very pessimistic. I suffer from this terribly, as I'm sure you've picked that up. A very pessimistic outlook on whether or not we even deserve to be paid. It's not that I believe it or agree with it. It's just that I've had that.
Are you going to touch on this impostor syndrome that she talked about?
There is a little bit of that.
That was really good.
But what I want to say is, what's really interesting, something that's come about through the technological advances, meaning that now we've got YouTube and podcasting and stuff like that, is that now we've found that when people, I couldn't believe it when I first saw it, when people, I got very involved with the YouTube journalism phenomena through researching narcissism and finding out there was a very rich community with people who were supported financially by their subscribers. Now, this is a whole new phenomenon. I mean, in the last sort of 15 years, we've seen this new phenomenon. We've seen it with eBay as well, where people can set themselves up to do things that previously were the privilege of only
I think it's an interesting topic. It's a big one.
Institutions.
I mean,
all I want to say is this, right? Like, we've been told that you can't fund the arts, but you know what? When people are left to their own devices, they fund the arts all the time, and there is a revenue for it. There is a need for it. This idea there's no need for it and it's not got a monetary value, it's a lie. And it's a lie coming to us from the capitalist system. I just thought you'd like that. I've just thought of it. I'm sorry it's so raw. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I think there's some truth there, but there's also some massive holes in that. And I mean, I've done quite a lot of crowdfunding, and and you're dead right. I mean, artists and individuals have always had to individually fund themselves and find the revenue for the projects and this kind of stuff. And I'm not obviously against that, because people should fund and fight, do those sort of things. But we're talking here about also the public purse, institutions. We're also talking about here the imbalance of where wealth in society is, So, and also, I mean, and we touched on it earlier, and in the last couple of minutes, we should maybe say something about it, is that, in our situation when we were young and we met, and we formed a musicians collective, then one of the problems was that the pubs were making a lot of money, putting on bands and not paying them. and we wanted to change that situation around, and therefore the breweries themselves, you can say, well, they didn't mind, but they would do anything to get people through the door, but they wouldn't necessarily want to pay for it.
But to be accurate, actually, the problem was that nobody was putting in bands, as far as I can tell. Do you remember? So we had to almost build it up.
Well, they didn't see the value in culture, and then we were able to prove it. We were able to prove it by, say, well, give us the night, pay us, give us a percentage of the bar, we'll build the scene, and we were able to put that pressure on. And because we collectively, we'll have to do a fireside chat on this, we'll have to, people don't know what a fireside chat is. It's something we're coming up with where we're just going to talk like the space station thing for a lot longer. But me and Paul in the late 90s, we were part of a collective that organized in a small town that organized majority, not all the acts, but a lot of the acts, and started to put on concerts and put pressure on to be paid and these kind of things. Quite a successful little couple of years. And this for me is quite an important issue, because when we talk about withdrawing of our labor, we're actually talking about control of our labor as well, and where this sort of stuff should go, how we should organize, and I think we would agree that we were against this idea of battle of the bands, like a pub would put on.
I hated that.
They would put on, say, well, which band is the best, and then they get a regular slot, or they get a little badge or something. I don't know what they get these things, but they become the best bands because they get people in the door, don't they?
Yeah. The idea is that every band would bring in people to support them, but it was just really capitalistic and shitty, and not about art. And
it's connected to the whole pay-to-play problem,
Absolutely.
And when my band was playing we moved from the Midlands and we went to London and we started playing, you'd get these big venues and you'd have to get 50 people through the door, and then you'd get like 10, a certain percentage of the take after that, and
that's in London, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, what they did is they give you tickets, and if you gave it to the person, or at the door, then once it reached a certain number, you would start getting a percentage. So if you put 300-400 through the door, or a couple of hundred, you maybe get a couple of £100. But if you only got a few in, then you get nothing. And they put on half a dozen bands, and so they'd have have a load of people swigging the beer and making the real money, pretending to be the leaders of culture, and meanwhile all those bands were paying themselves to be able to play. And I think that is quite a big problem.
Well, they were trying to ensure that they made a killing, and it was difficult because live music was in the decline at the time, and I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just saying that they weren't invested in the music being there for its own sake, and people weren't coming out. To be fair to the venues, people weren't coming out, and I think part of what we did in the collective, which we're going to talk about in much greater length in one of the Christmas fireside shows, but one of the great things about the collective is we didn't just organise with the venues. We also made a fuss. We did press. That was a big part of what we did. We did postering. We did like a lot of stuff. It was a full package.
We did demonstrations, and we did all sorts of. We came from different angles on it. We had the idea of collectively organising the bands.
It was PR as much as it was practical. It wasn't just unionisation, although that was an element of it, and of course caused some problems in some places. But we basically lit a fire that worked on many different levels, and we basically said to the venues, like, we're going to work. Well, we saw it as with you, but we probably sold it to them as work for you, which was probably a mistake. But it did work. It got us through a couple of doors, didn't it?
We're drifting into it, and I think all the pitfalls and things that we did then would be quite interesting. The big story is that artists are not organised in general, and they are not paid in general, and I think what the Artists Union England are trying to achieve here is a way of starting to collectively organise people, but not just in one town, because that was definitely a problem for us. We were one town and people move on and things change, but actually across the country. Now, they're not yet big, but they are a recognised union. They are working in that direction, and I think that's a very positive thing.
It's great. I'm very excited for what Teresa's doing, and I almost felt a sense of envy actually that she was so organised, and she's committed so wholeheartedly and so effectively to her mission. And yes, we do have a little bit of skin in the game, don't we, you and I? And what we're going to do, Teresa, if you're listening, is we're going to do a really big show. We're going to do an hour and a half on this, I think, one of our shows that are coming out soon, and we're going to try and really, do justice to both what she's doing and what we've got from our past on this, and we want to talk about it because me and you, we do hope this is the future, don't we? We hope this is the future. That's what we hope.
No, definitely. I mean, it's certainly part of what needs to happen. So, well, I think maybe we should wind it up there, and I can hear the music coming. Just to say well, I mean, people might be listening to this a year after it goes out, but this is the end of this series. We've covered a lot of things. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be putting other stuff out, but not quite in the same format. And well, we wish everybody a happy Christmas and happy New Year. And I shall see you soon, Paul. You take care, yeah?
Yeah, well, we're looking forward. We're going to be burning it up on this with the fireside chats coming out soon. So look out for those, everybody. You'll know what we mean when they get released.
Okay, Paul. Take care now.
You too. Cheers, man.
Bye.
This week's music is by Bethany Elen and is called Ella's Song. Her website is bethanyellen.co.uk. I would like to thank all of our listeners and guests in this series and hope you enjoyed the journey so far. If you would like to support us and help us keep going, you can donate to us through our website. I wish you all happy holidays and hope to see you again next year. Take care.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We believe in freedom when the killing of black men, black in front of the sun, freedom as the killing of white men, in freedom, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. I am a woman who speaks in a voice, and I must be heard. At times I can be quite difficult, but I will bow to no man's word. We believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. To me, young people come first. They have courage where we fail. If I can but shed some light as they carry us through the gate. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. The older I get, the better I know. The secret of going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young, who dare to run against the storm, not needing to clutch for power, not needing the light to shine on me. I need to be one in the number as we stand against tyranny. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Struggling ourselves don't mean a whole lot. We've come to realize teaching others to stand up and fight is the only way to stop believe in freedom, cannot freedom, in freedom, cannot rest. We believe in freedom, cannot rest. In freedom, yeah. Freedom, cannot freedom, in freedom. We cannot rest. We cannot rest. We cannot rest.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have something to say to us, then join our Facebook group or contact us at outaspace.com. That's outa-space.com. See you soon.